Right, here's the board and it's ready for radiusing. You can see that it has been glued onto the neck, it's nicely centered, and what I've done as my radiusing setup is probably worth a bit of an explanation. You can see here that there are some screws sitting on what will be the waist at the side of the board, and there's also another board along the side as we're clamped. Now what happens is, use a radiusing block. The radiusing block sits on top, moves back and forth, and sands the board to radius. But the idea is that these screws act as depth stops. So the side of the radiusing block will stop when it hits the screw on each side. And what I've done is I've worked out the height these screws need to be in order to get exactly the right radius. This is a 12-inch radius block, but it's very easy when you're radiusing to rock the block back and forth and get a wider radius than 12. And the piece of wood here, with the little guides on it, is also intended to act as a guide for the edge of the block, which again stops it moving this way. So here's our fingerboard. It's radiused. It was sanded to 80 grit, which is all I'm going to sand it to now because there are a few more things to be done to it. It's now set in the right place. I removed the screws. They worked very well. Now, one little job that I'm going to do, which is a fairly straightforward thing, is I'm just going to check that all of the slots are cut to the correct depth. So to do this, I'm using a fret saw, which actually has a depth slot. See, when you cut the slots flat, you'll tend to get a deeper section in the middle and a shallower section at the sides after it's radiused. So what you have to do is just run this saw over to double check that all of your slots are the right height. Now the headstock is marked front and back, so what I'm going to do is cut away the wood. And I could do this with a bow saw, but really there's not very much wood, so I'll just simply use a Shinto rasp to cut down, and as you can see already quite a lot of wood has come out. One of the things about working wood with hand tools is that when you're working with a power tool or something, what you hear is the power tool. When you're working with hand tools, what you hear is the wood. It makes a very big difference, I think, when you're making musical instruments. Because by the time the instrument emerges, you've learned something about it. You've learned something about how the wood responds, how it feels, what the wood is trying to say. I know that sounds kind of weird and esoteric, but I really think there's some truth to it. And here are the wings of the headstock. They've been glued on and clamped, and they're going to sit overnight, and then tomorrow I'll be able to cut out the full shape of the headstock, these little pointy bits here. The good thing about these wings is they actually come from the part of the headstock down here that I chopped off, so the grain direction matches, which means that once they're dried and once they're sanded, they're actually going to be, well, not invisible, but certainly much harder to spot, especially once the finish is on. So, with my neck all trimmed, I'm now doing the tenon. Now, on these guitars, they tend to have a flared tenon, but what I'm going to do, I'm actually doing a straight tenon. So from the end of the fingerboard it'll go back straight. That enables me to cut a straight tenon into the body, and I'm going to create a lip which actually provides extra pressure so that if pressure is put on the neck, it's not going to flip up or do anything weird. So now the tenon and the neck edges are being cleaned up with the jack plane to ensure a nice straight line. For detail work I can get in with a block plane as well, which is around here with the transition between the neck and the headstock. And then I just give it a quick check and have a look and see how my tenon's coming along. The line is right here, and got a nice 90-degree line there as well. So I'm in the process of drilling some holes in the body. I'm going to be planing the top of the body, but I'm drilling the holes before I do so, so that if there is any chip out, that'll get planed away. I've drilled 2 holes here all the way through using my egg beater drill and its guide, and this is where the control knobs will be, and those will actually act as a reference point for my control cavity. I've also drawn on my pickup. I started by drawing on the cover and then marking out the dimensions of the edges. Now what I'm doing is I'm using a hand turned bit which will cut out the corners, and then I'll connect them with straight lines, and I'll use a router plane to get all that out, and that's how I'll start my pickup cavity. So now I'm going to go in and I'm going to do these edges more and clean up a bit with the router plane. I'll put it down to most of the depth of its final bit. And here we are, dug out with basic chisels, finished off on the bottom with a router plane, 1 pickup cavity. Now it's time to get really old school. I've marked the cavity on the back, roughly. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to use a bit and a brace. I've put a pencil on here taped to the right thing as a depth stop, and this is a Forstner bit, and what happens is you push it in, you tighten your bit, and or rather you tighten your brace, and the bit actually becomes self-guiding. It works really, really well. But you can see that this tool is really efficient, and it gives a very, very clean hole. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drill a hole here, here, and maybe I can fit 2 more in here, and then I'll simply use a chisel and clean out the rest of the waste. So here are the 4 holes, and I've started chiseling out the cavity now, just digging away. I'm trying my best to keep the edges clear. Then I'm going to go in, I'm going to do these curves with a gouge and a little bit of sanding. And here's a cavity. So I've left it a little thick now, and I'll clean it out with the router plane later on. But basically the shape is now there.